Do you have a moment? The doctor's voice pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see a concerned expression on his face. It had been a decade since my mother-in-law had become wheelchair-bound, and her regular hospital visits for checkups and physical therapy had become routine. Just on this particular day, I was sitting in the waiting room, patiently waiting for her to finish her tests. I nodded at the doctor, curious about the urgency in his eyes. "Of course, doctor," I responded. "What's the matter?" He motioned for me to follow him to a more private area, away from the bustling waiting room. "Hey, I need to speak with you about something important regarding your mother-in-law," he said. Bishan nodded at me as I followed him. Her primary doctor was a woman, and I hadn't heard of any changes in her medical team. Why would a different doctor want to talk about my mother-in-law? I wondered. First, we settled into a small consultation room, and he locked the door behind us, heightening my sense of unease. "My name is Emma," I introduced myself, trying to ease the tension.
I need to tell you something that neither your mother-in-law nor her primary doctor should hear. That's why I only want to tell you.
"Only me? What's going on?" But so, as I waited for the doctor to explain, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach. "My name is Emma," I repeated, "and I'm a 38-year-old office worker. I had been working remotely lately, a change in my usual routine. My childhood had been marked by the absence of my mother, who had left our home when I was just a child. Betrayed by my hard-working father, I had heard stories of my mother, Patricia, being a spendthrift who had abandoned her family. My parents eventually divorced, and my father's dedication allowed me to pursue higher education and secure a job, even if it wasn't at a prestigious firm. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 14 years. When we married, his father had already passed away, and his mother, Evelyn, had welcomed me into their family with open arms. Evelyn was once a vibrant and cheerful woman, but a car accident had left her wheelchair-bound, robbing her of her vitality. The accident had taken a toll on her mental state, and she had become withdrawn. His concern for her well-being had brought me here today. Well-being Daniel and I decided to move back into her family home to provide her with care. We took a week off from work to dedicate our time to her, with the intention of returning to our jobs once she was feeling better. Evelyn's face had brightened when we first arrived, but as the days passed, she became increasingly reluctant to let us leave. It was as if she couldn't bear the thought of being alone. Even when I worked from home, she clung to me, making it impossible for me to bring her into view of my co-workers. Daniel, on the other hand, went above and beyond, taking days off from work to assist with her care, despite years of physical therapy with no improvement in her condition, trapping me in a cycle of constant care and confinement. A decade had passed since we had moved back to take care of Evelyn. She had turned 65, and with each passing year, her dependence on us had grown. But the strain on our personal lives had become overwhelming, leading Daniel to reduce his visits over time. Evelyn's fear of being alone intensified, making it nearly impossible for me to leave her, even for a few minutes. My personal life had all but disappeared, and resentment had begun to creep in. The breaking point came when a new doctor, Dr. Ryan, entered the picture. On the day of Evelyn's routine checkup, he stopped me in the hallway, asking if I was Evelyn's daughter. I confirmed my identity, puzzled by his inquiry. He led me into a private room, away from prying eyes, and began to speak in earnest.
You've been living with Evelyn to take care of her, right?
I nodded, not sure where this conversation was headed. Yes, for the past 10 years, I've been working remotely from her home while providing her with care. Dr. Ryan listened intently as I began to share my frustrations and the toll it had taken on my personal life.
His words were like a sledgehammer, demolishing the facade of the life I had built with Evelyn over the past decade.
However, what reached my ears wasn't Dr. Ryan's words, but a scream from Evelyn coming from the examination room. Panic surged through both of us, and we rushed to the room, fearing the worst. The sight that greeted us was beyond comprehension. Evelyn, my mother-in-law, was standing on her own 2 feet, walking without the aid of her wheelchair or cane. It was a sight I hadn't witnessed in years, and it left me speechless. He turned to me with a sense of urgency. "You need to leave her house immediately, Emma. Get away from your mother-in-law." She had been his accomplice, falsifying medical records to maintain the illusion of her condition. As the truth came to light, his anger began to transform into a mixture of sympathy and disappointment. He couldn't condone her actions, but he could understand the deep loneliness and desperation that had driven her to such extreme measures. Dr. Ryan reported the deception to the authorities, setting in motion a legal investigation into her case. The consequences for her and Dr. Smith would be severe, but it was a necessary step toward justice. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and legal proceedings. She faced the loss of her home, her reputation in ruins, and the prospect of criminal charges. At present, he and his wife, now living in a rented apartment, were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Sadly, the trust they had once held for her was replaced by a profound sense of betrayal. Their marriage was strained as they struggled to come to terms with the deception that had torn their family apart. With the legal case against her, and Dr. Smith underway, he found himself torn between anger and a desire for closure. "Why did you do it?" he asked, sitting across from her in the courtroom, where she awaited her trial. Tears welled up in her eyes as she struggled to find the words. "I was so lonely," she said after the accident. "Like Morrison, I felt like I had lost everything. I didn't want to burden you and your wife, so I thought this was the only way to have someone by my side." His heart ached for her, but the wounds of betrayal ran deep. He'd spent a decade of his life caring for her under false pretenses, sacrificing his own happiness and well-being. Her actions had consequences that extended far beyond her own life. But as the trial concluded, she and Dr. Smith were sentenced to community service and required to repay the disability benefits they had wrongfully received. It was a bittersweet victory, as their family had already been irreparably damaged. He and his wife sought counseling to navigate the emotional aftermath of the deception. Past once shattered was difficult to rebuild, and they faced a long road to healing. The story continued with twists and turns as they embarked on a journey to rebuild their lives and find a way forward. The path to forgiveness was uncertain, but they were determined to move beyond the shadows of deception and betrayal. Rebuilding their lives had become their top priority. Lives had become the focal point of our existence. That's Evelyn's deception now exposed, and the legal proceedings concluded. Daniel and I faced the daunting task of moving forward. We decided to relocate to a new city, hoping that a change of scenery would help us leave the painful memories behind. The apartment we rented was a blank canvas, a symbol of the fresh start we so desperately needed. As I unpacked our belongings, I couldn't help but reflect on the past decade. The sacrifices I had made, the years I had devoted to Evelyn's care, and the betrayal that had shaken the foundation of our family were all part of a painful history. But now we had the opportunity to define a new chapter in our lives. Rebuilding trust in our marriage was an arduous journey. The wounds of deception ran deep, and both Daniel and I carried the scars of the past. But we were committed to healing, and that commitment propelled us forward. Counseling sessions became a lifeline for us. We learned to communicate openly about our feelings, fears, and insecurities. Slowly but surely, the walls that had separated us began to crumble, replaced by a newfound sense of understanding and empathy. Daniel's dedication to our relationship was unwavering. He apologized for his initial absence and recognized the toll it had taken on our marriage. I, too, acknowledged my own role in enabling Evelyn's deception by not questioning her condition sooner. It's officially in our new city. We established a daily routine that allowed us to nurture our relationship while pursuing our individual passions. Daniel resumed his career, and I embraced the opportunity to explore new career paths. The remote work environment had opened up new possibilities, and I was determined to make the most of them. Feast of Saints, one evening, as Daniel and I sat on our balcony, sipping wine and watching the sunset, he turned to me with a smile. "You know, Emma, we're finally living for ourselves." I nodded in agreement, feeling a sense of liberation I hadn't experienced in years. "Yes, we are," I replied. Just with the physical and emotional distance from Evelyn, we had the chance to reconnect with our extended family. Daniel's sister, Laura, had been estranged from Evelyn for years, but we reached out to her, hoping to mend the fractured bonds of their family. Laura's response was hesitant at first, but she eventually agreed to meet us. Over time, our relationship with her grew stronger, and we welcomed her into our lives. It was a reminder that family could be chosen, not just defined by blood. As the months turned into years, we received news about Evelyn. Her health had deteriorated, and she had been moved to a nursing home. Although our relationship with her remained strained, we couldn't ignore the fact that she was still family. Daniel and I decided to visit her one last time, seeking a semblance of closure. The nursing home was a stark contrast to the home where we had once lived. Evelyn was frail and bedridden, a far cry from the woman who had deceived us for so long. We sat by her bedside, holding her hand, and I found it within me to forgive her for the pain she had caused. It wasn't a complete absolution of her actions, but it was a step toward healing our own wounds. Evelyn's passing marked the end of a tumultuous chapter in our lives. The deed of deception had left scars that would never fully fade, but we had emerged stronger and more resilient. Daniel and I continued to build our lives together, forging a bond that had weathered the storm of betrayal. We embraced the opportunities our new city offered, and I found fulfillment in a career that had once seemed out of reach. But the story of our family's deception served as a poignant reminder that truth, forgiveness, and love could triumph over even the darkest of deceptions. You see, our journey had been painful, but it had ultimately led us to a place of healing and renewal.